Tonight, ISIS's first strike in Iran. Team Trump lawyers up. And
it'll give you an idea.
That would drive me insane.
South Korea's new president, Moon Jae-in, has suspended the deployment of the United States Missile Defense System, or THAAD. He's called for a, quote, environmental assessment of the system. But during his campaign, Moon was critical of the deployment, which many South Koreans, as well as China, oppose. If the suspension of THAAD became permanent, it would mark a major breach with the U.S. on North Korea policy. The United Arab Emirates is threatening anyone who, quote, shows sympathy or any form of bias towards Qatar with up to 15 years in prison and a $136,000 fine. On Monday, the UAE, along with Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and others, severed diplomatic ties with Qatar. Scientists have found the oldest known fossils of Homo sapiens in Morocco. They're around 300,000 years old, predating the earliest evidence of our species by about 100,000 years. The fossils were also found thousands of miles away from that previous site, suggesting early Homo sapiens were evolving across the continent. President Trump nominated Christopher Wray to head the FBI, calling him a man of, quote, impeccable credentials. Wray was the Assistant Attorney General in charge of the criminal division under President George W. Bush. He's now a criminal defense lawyer and represented New Jersey Governor Chris Christie in the notorious Bridgegate scandal. Former FBI Director James Comey's prepared testimony for the Senate Intelligence Committee hearing tomorrow confirms much of what was leaked to the press after his firing. According to text released today, the president demanded loyalty and said he had nothing to do with Russia, and asked what Comey could do to lift the cloud of the Russia investigation. Comey will also testify that Trump asked him to drop the investigation of Michael Flynn the day after the National Security Advisor was fired, a specific request that could be construed as obstruction of justice. Trump's lawyer says the president feels vindicated by Comey's prepared statement.
The images are unprecedented. An Islamic State video from inside Iran showing ISIS fighters on a deadly rampage inside Tehran's parliament building.
يا ربي لك الحمد. أتظنون أننا سنرحل؟ أتظنون أننا سنرحل؟
In Arabic, the gunmen vow to step up attacks inside Iran as they execute 11 people over the course of a 4-hour standoff. They had assault rifles, hand grenades, and suicide vests. At the same time, 15 miles away, there was gunfire at the mausoleum of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, the father of Iran's revolution. And then this, a suicide blast. There has never been an ISIS attack in Iran, let alone one as brazen as this. It was thought the highly regulated security environment there simply didn't afford space for the group to operate. But the Shia-ruled superpower is a major target for ISIS. Iran has given material support to groups fighting ISIS in both Syria and Iraq. It's even sent troops of its own to join those fights. ISIS has tried to attack Iran before. Some previous plots have been foiled. And this video from back in March showed ISIS fighters speaking in Farsi to urge Iranian Sunni ethnic communities to take up arms. We asked an Iran expert about the terror group's influence inside Iran.
Iran is not sort of the organic breeding ground for ISIS. But ISIS does have opportunities to exploit grievances among aggrieved Sunni populations. And it does have a community of Sunnis. And in that Sunni community that is marginalized and feels disempowered, there has been some support for ISIS.
I mean, the timing of it, what do you make of that?
Well, I think a lot of people are definitely questioning because of the timing, particularly coming on the back of President Trump's recent trip to the Gulf and the Arab unity against Iran as part of the new counterterrorism narrative. It's definitely interesting, and the Iranians are spinning the story that actually it's Saudi that's behind this.
In an online statement, ISIS warned of more to come inside Iran, but this attack in itself could raise tensions to new levels in a region that's already on edge.
Leadership plans, intentions.
In Washington today, the nation's top 4 intelligence leaders testified in front of the Senate Intelligence Committee. And none would say whether the president asked them to shut down the FBI's investigation of ex-National Security Advisor Michael Flynn.
I have never been directed to do anything I believe to be illegal, immoral, unethical, or inappropriate.
But today's hearing was just the undercard. Tomorrow, fired FBI Director James Comey will have his turn. The investigation has become a full-time obsession for much of the country. But for the White House, it's anything but entertaining. According to a new report in the Washington Post, staffers have been instructed to retain their documents and communications records in case they get drawn into the investigation themselves. And many are beginning to look for help from an old and established Washington industry.
If you're in Stan Brand's office, you're having a bad day.
I'm a defense lawyer. I'm not a rabbi or a priest. I don't make judgments. I defend people.
It's been a long time since Washington was fixated on a huge, never-ending White House scandal. The last 2 occupants saw nothing like the Bill Clinton years, when scandal was everywhere, all the time. What can insiders at the Clinton White House teach us about what's going on inside the Trump White House? Let's start with George Stephanopoulos. Forget this guy. This is George Stephanopoulos, White House Communications Director. He was first subpoenaed in 1994 during the Whitewater investigation, and he was terrified.
Stephanopoulos recalls this time in his 1999 book, All Too Human, which I have here in the original 14-cassette audio version. It's read by Jeff Woodman, a giant of the audiobook world, and the story of Stephanopoulos and his first subpoena comes on tape 8, side 2.
Now I understood, finally and deeply, what I should never have let myself forget. That I wasn't a precocious kid playing at politics. That my job wasn't just a game. Walking down Connecticut Avenue as a top White House official about to hire an attorney to represent me in a criminal investigation was a rite of initiation. For my new lawyer, it was a routine Saturday.
That lawyer was Stan.
So what do you tell people when someone comes in and says, look, I have a sense I might need a lawyer?
Well, the first thing you do is tell them don't throw anything away. And don't talk to your colleagues about this. If you want to talk to me. And go on with your life. Now, within usually the first bit of time of talking to someone, you can assess pretty much whether you think they have any real exposure. And if they don't, you can tell them that I think if you don't do anything stupid, like throw things away or obstruct justice, you'll probably be okay.
John Lenzner is a former federal prosecutor who now defends people under federal investigation. He explained how a White House investigation can wrap up literally everyone.
So there may be a lower level or mid-level staffer who works for a senior official that is under investigation. Those individuals who work for him may want to hire their own counsel because they may have been privy to conversations or meetings that investigators are going to want to ask them about.
Stephanopoulos was never charged with anything related to Whitewater, but he was served with at least 4 subpoenas. He had testified before a grand jury a couple times and before Congress too. Whitewater began with scrutiny of a single real estate deal in Arkansas, but it ballooned into a 4-year investigation that ended with Bill Clinton impeached for lying to investigators. His political career survived. His administration survived. Stephanopoulos survived too. But his story teaches us this. When you're a big deal at the White House, close to the president, lawyering up is part of the job. But it can be part of the job for people who are a much smaller deal too.
I think I was 26, and I was working for Leon Panetta, who was the White House Chief of Staff at the time. And Monica Lewinsky was my intern.
Needless to say, Jen Palmieri eventually found herself having to lawyer up too.
So I was pretty young, I was pretty freaked out, and some of my older colleagues there told me, we should probably really hook you up with a lawyer, and I was like, what? I don't, and I thought that's ridiculous. And then I heard from the FBI, and I thought, oh.
Jen hired a lawyer. She had to pay for her own legal fees, which totaled a few $1,000s. That's her money, and low-level staffers at the White House don't make that much. And she got off easy. Stan told us Stephanopoulos' legal bills totaled between $100,000 and $150,000 in mid-1990s money. Other people who worked for Clinton had to pay even more.
The Clintons had to go to fundraisers to fundraise for their staff to pay for legal fees.
She too was never charged with anything. Her political career didn't suffer either. She went on to run communications in the Obama White House and the Hillary Clinton campaign. But the Clinton White House operated like this, with investigators snooping around for years.
It would be reported in the press that someone talked to Bill Clinton, and that person would get subpoenaed the next day. So people stopped wanting to talk to the president because he was a subpoena magnet.
The Trump presidency is entering a phase where everyone needs a lawyer, and investigators are scouring everything that happens. In the Clinton White House, that was a team-building exercise.
You were so under siege and under threat that you all banded together.
Trump's White House is leaky, and the president often lashes out on his own, throwing staffers under the bus and telling his version of events even when it gets him into trouble. Stan said that every Politico under this threat wants to act like that, but he says it's not a good idea.
The best advice is not to talk to the press about this, and that for some people is antithetical to their vision of why they're in the government.
They want to clear their name.
They want to clear their name.
They want to tell their story.
Right. And what I say to those people is, that is something you should tell to your rabbi or your priest, but it's not going to help you to tell that to the New York Times.
How often do people take that advice from you?
Some do, some don't. And most who don't live to rue the day.
Tomorrow, Britons will vote in their next prime minister. Despite polls tightening, Conservative Theresa May is expected to hang on as leader of the UK. But even after almost 20 years in frontline politics, little is known about May. So who is she, and what does she really want to do with her mandate? Aditya Chakraborty examines the pedigree of the woman likely to be crowned Queen of Brexit Britain.
Here's what Theresa May would like you to know about her. She's the daughter of a vicar. She's into cooking, shoes, hill walking. She is, the subtext runs, just like you. Ordinary, common sense, not like David Cameron and his posh chums. Except the woman who would rule Britain is not ordinary at all. Here she is trying to speak human.
Will ensure that Britain has the strong and stable leadership. Strong and stable leadership. Strong and stable leadership. Strong and stable government and leadership.
Here she is trying to act human.
What's the naughtiest thing you ever did?
Oh, goodness me. I have to confess, when me and my friends sort of used to run through the fields of wheat, the farmers weren't too pleased about that.
And here she is with her husband, dishing out marriage advice.
I get to decide when I take the bins out, not if I take the bins out. But, I mean, of course...
There's boy jobs and girl jobs, you see.
There's boy jobs and girl jobs.
Straight out of the 1950s. In British politics, how you sit on a studio sofa is as important as where you stand on cybersecurity. Which makes May an oddity. In a business that demands a photogenic family, she's childless, as Conservative rivals are not above pointing out. As a public figure, she's introverted. Her number 2 at the Home Office recalls May throwing a Christmas office lunch in January.
I thought I would liven the place up, so I started telling anecdotes, which of course they weren't really used to, and they were kind of laughing rather absurdly, and I went back thinking, well, that was an interesting experience, and God bless her, at least she gave us a free Christmas lunch. And then 3 or 4 days later, each of the ministers got a bill for £58.74.
Yet May has spent nearly 20 years at the top of politics, and when Cameron stepped down after losing last summer's Brexit referendum, she swiftly became Prime Minister.
I'm delighted to have won so much support from my colleagues.
A win tomorrow will hand May her own mandate. at just a point Brexit Britain rewrites the rules on everything from GM crops to foreign policy. In this campaign, May's offered a kind of faith-based leadership, telling voters she'll be a great leader without detailing the kind of policy she plans to lead on. Alone among party leaders, she's ducked out of the TV debates.
Prime Minister, if you're so strong and Jeremy Corbyn's so weak, as you said, why have you sent Amber Rudd to take on his arguments at the debate tonight?
Look,
I think she's been cautious. She basically had to get to polling day without making a mistake. So I think she's kind of kept in defence rather than going out on attack.
We do know she's no ideologue, but it's what causes she adopts and how that's so striking. As modern Britain's longest-serving Home Secretary, her key policy was a hand-me-down, a pledge to slash immigration numbers. Impossible, many Tories admitted, but the right-wing press demanded it, so May became a zealot, sending these vans into inner-city areas. The same goes for the issue that will define her premiership, Brexit. Before the vote, May fought for Britain to stay in Europe. Ever since, she's been more hardline than many Brexiteers.
Brexit means Brexit, and we're going to make a success of it.
Cheered on by the same Eurosceptic press. Stack it all up, and May's a populist, just one who doesn't like people. Amid political flux and economic slump, she's trying to stave off a structural crisis of conservatism. She doesn't bring any new ideas, but old appeals to nationhood.
If you believe you're a citizen of the world, you're a citizen of nowhere.
Now, where have you heard that kind of rhetoric before? This project of populism from above is being driven by these two, Special Advisors Fiona Hill and Nick Timothy. Americans may be used to such powerful unelected officials. In Britain, they're an unwelcome novelty.
She was clearly competent and intelligent, but she relied to a disproportionate and strange degree on her two special advisors. Even when their judgment was clearly wrong, she would want to go along with what they were suggesting, although her judgment, in my view, was usually better than theirs.
A worrying verdict, especially as all the government's Brexit decisions are going through Timothy. Such centralisation plus May's famous inflexibility equals a recipe for disaster in the Brexit wrangling.
She won't do deals. She does things on the merit. And that's why people, the conventional politicians, find her a difficult woman.
So how's that going to play out when she's dealing with the conventional politicians of Europe?
The deal's got to be good for Britain. She will walk away from the table if necessary.
If May's looked so tortured in this campaign, she reflects the contortions of conservatism. The oldest party in the world is only just catching up with a new populism. The political arm of business is pushing for a policy, Brexit, hated by business. What do you get when you reconcile these irreconcilables? The answer appears to be Theresa May. For now, at least.
For a while now, advertisements have followed you around the internet based on what you type. But one new company, Kloop, is offering the next wave of ad tracking. Artificial intelligence technology, known as a neural network that can target ads to you based on the pictures you post.
Let's say you take a selfie and you're wearing a certain brand of sneakers. The neural network is able to detect that in real time and then follow you into whichever mobile app or mobile website you open next. So let's say you close Instagram and you open the Huffington Post app. So there you might get an ad creative from Under Armour.
The technology works by breaking an image down into sections for analysis and comparing them with information it's been previously fed about what a can of Coke or a pizza looks like. Kloop has already done work for Coca-Cola, McDonald's and Walmart, and photo tracking seems primed to grow. Kloop estimates that we share nearly 500 million images to Twitter, Facebook and Instagram every day.
In the same way that inputs from a keyboard became the starting point for most marketers to target people on desktop computers, we believe that the inputs from a camera screen is the starting point for targeting on smartphones.
Advertisers are increasingly desperate for ways to get the attention of a saturated audience. Kloop says, after running 500 campaigns for 200 brands, that it gets more people clicking on ads than the other, more conventional means of targeting you. So it's likely that lots of other companies will start to track your photographs too. And the arms race for your attention will continue. Next up, video. So soon, there will be nowhere that brands can't find you.
Have you ever heard the Windsor hum?
No, I haven't.
My dad has, and I've heard a lot of people who have heard it, so I think it's very real.
It's like a very low, almost like a vibration. You think you hear it, but it could be your mind playing tricks on you.
In Windsor, Ontario, across the river from Detroit, hundreds of residents complain of a low rumbling. It's one that keeps them up at night and rattles their windows, and it's been loud enough to crack eggs. But no one knows for sure where the sound comes from.
This is the west recorder because that's west. Back there in the corner, you can't even see it. This is the south recorder. And then way over here is a north recorder. And they get synced and pulled off and put back out every 24 to 48 hours.
There are 1,500 members in the Windsor Hum Facebook group who have dedicated themselves to tracking down the origins of the hum. Mike Provost runs the group. He lives in a town called Old Sandwich, and it's apparently where the hum is loudest. So you guys collected a terabyte of audio recordings on this thing?
Actually, no, I've got about 8 terabytes.
8 terabytes. Okay, I want to hear what this thing sounds like.
You sure?
I'm positive.
I understand this vibrates on the floor and everything, so you're not really getting it clear.
Okay.
But it'll give you an idea.
That would drive me insane. Provost is pretty sure that the hum is America's fault. More specifically, he thinks it's coming from Zug Island, often known as Detroit's Area 51. The island, located in the Detroit River nearly 5 miles from Detroit itself, is owned by U.S. Steel, and the company won't say specifically what goes on there. It's closely guarded by private security and Homeland Security officials, but we tried to get as close as we could.
We can't go as the crow flies unless we had a helicopter, which we don't have today.
Kevin Bacchus is a charter fishing captain who works in Detroit.
So I don't really know much about what's down there. People say stay away from there, but I don't know why. So all this black shit, that's Zug Island? That's Zug Island. I don't even know about none of this shit, butter.
And you can hear it. You can hear this horrible noise. This is a restricted area defined by Homeland Security regulations. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of similar to what we were hearing across the river.
There's definitely some depth to what I hear. Yeah. In other words, deep. Maybe across the river, they may not be able to hear this machine. They might only be able to hear that low rumble. That's just what I'm guessing from what I'm hearing. What the heck do I know? I'm a fishing charter cap, for Christ's sake.
In 2014, the Canadian government commissioned a report about the hum, which we obtained through the Freedom of Information Act. Researchers set up microphones around Windsor, but due to some cross-border politics, they weren't allowed to investigate on Zug Island itself. The report concludes that the sound is most likely coming from Zug Island, but they can't be sure. And no one's positive why only the Canadian side of the river can hear it.
As far as I'm concerned, it's the Detroit hum. It's not the Windsor hum because we don't emit it. We just experience it. There's nothing much we can do on the Canadian side. We have nothing between Canada and the United States that actually deals with noise and vibration. You could call it what you want, but at the end of the day, it's not good for international relations.
It's that frequency that is driving us crazy. All we have to do is have somebody come up and say, yeah, okay, we're making the noise, we're working on muffling it, and we don't think we can fix it. We're sorry. And then we're happy.
That's Vice News Tonight for Wednesday, June 7th.